All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So yesterday we kind of discontinued or interrupted our live stream because we had some technician come over. So now we're capable of continuing what we were talking about yesterday. And we were actually talking about the hunting dogs, and certainly when the hunting dogs would basically catch and start eating on some of that prey that was supposed to be considered something that they were supposed to hunt, on whether it is permissible to eat from it or whether it is considered something that they had caught for themselves. In other words, it fits within the category of right there, akala sab'a. And of course, whatever the carnivores had eaten, then in that situation, what they hunted for themselves, it basically is for them and not necessarily something that is considered within the category of that you had basically trained them to do. And then فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ, and that it's permissible for us to basically eat from whatever our trained dogs had hunted for us. So wanted to mention, of course, that there were two ahadith in this regards, and we were talking about these two ahadith. The first one was the hadith that was narrated off Adi ibn Hatim. And the hadith goes, وَإِذَا أَكَلَ فَلَا تَأْكُلْ. And if the hunting dog basically eats from whatever that it had caught, then don't eat from it, for it caught it for itself and not for you, basically. And this hadith was narrated by Muslim, meaning it's an authentic hadith. The second hadith that we said, it was rather contradictory to the first one, where the Prophet ﷺ said in that regards, if you send off your dog, that is, i.e., trained dog, and you mention the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on it, then eat from it, even if he had eaten from it. And وَكُلْ مَا رَدَّتْ عَلَيْكَ يَدُكَ. And basically, well, what your hand basically brought back to you. In other words, that dog and what it came with. So basically the remaining things. And we said that these two different narrations, because of their contradictory. Of course, the first group of scholars, they basically had said that the reason why the Prophet ﷺ was telling Adi to not eat from it was really because that's the recommended option, the recommended case in where he does not eat from it, and because he was well off, versus what he had told Abu Tha'lab al-Khushani, in where he was not well off, and therefore in his situation it was something that the Prophet ﷺ did give him the permission to eat from it. So from that stance, it basically is here telling us that it's recommended, and we talked about some details in understanding the circumstances that people are in, and also looking at the fatwa. Now, this is important to mention. The fatwa doesn't change because people had changed. The fatwa stays the same, okay? But the circumstances can affect the fatwa because, of course, of necessity or the situations. Just off a little bit off off topic here. Yesterday I was asked a question in where, yes, did the fatawa develop? Did they basically go into some state of evolution with time, and that people later discovered the authenticity of a certain hadith, and etc. So it's not that scholars later discovered a certain hadith or that the fatwa developed. No, you'll have the Malikis basically adopt the Maliki opinion, Shafi'i adopt the Shafi'i opinion, and the list goes on and on. A lot of what we see changing is not necessarily the fatwa themselves changing, as much as the society and the society, I would say, changing. In other words, it's really al-mutalaqin. It's basically those that are adopting, those that are taking in the fatwa. They're the ones that are right now, I would say, changing. So it's a society changing. It's the society basically becoming becoming more susceptible to accepting a certain fatwa over the other. So that's important to keep in mind, in where a lot of times the fatwa that was at one point not necessarily the prevalent fatwa or the adopted fatwa, not because it wasn't discovered that it was preponderant, but it was basically finding the different let's say factors to why that wasn't prevalent at the time, and now something else is prevalent because the society changed, and therefore taking in and adopting that fatwa became perhaps easier, perhaps something that found the medium in order to accept such fatwa. Okay, so just wanted to note that one. And same thing when we're looking at all, well, it's not just the fatwa per se, but that's also the case when it comes to a lot of the different fitan as well. So the different fitan, the different delusions can also find their way. And, the Prophet ﷺ had previously talked about iddahan. And what dakhan is, it's basically, from the word dakhan, which means smoke. So things become so murky. Things become so murky that people start confusing the right and wrong. It becomes so blurry, and they start confusing things, and they start making up their own interpretation. So this is extremely important to be aware of, because it can happen that people can confuse the different matters, thinking of it that that's what's actually appropriate. And then later on, it becomes so prevalent that people are attributing it to Islam, when in reality it has nothing to do with Islam. And in reality, it becomes really a progressive, or at least so that they wanted to, I guess, market it as that it's a progressive way, it's an advanced way, it's a civilized way, when in reality, it actually goes back to liberalism or postmodernism. The list goes on and on. So the second view, I know that some sisters actually had questions. We just want to lay out the different opinions here, and then inshallah we'll take in the questions. The second interpretation to why there were these two contradictory texts right there, in where Abu Umar had, which is Abu Umar Tamim ibn Abd al-Barr, he basically considered that this was abrogated, and that one of them is canceling out the other. And certainly al-Qurtubi had rejected such a claim, and said, well, we can't really submit to such a claim and accept such a claim, simply because we don't really know the dating for which text was mentioned first and which one was later. In other words, the chronology piece is extremely important. In fact, it is key. Before any claim that one of them is abrogated, well, we have to know the dating in order to cancel one and consider one was later and the previous was preceding. And the third opinion, for Shafi'i, I guess it kind of, I'm not sure why Al-Qurtubi had actually mentioned Shafi'i and, mentioned it not as part of this, but because the Shafi'i, some of the, here it says Ashabu Shafi'i. I want you to keep in mind, when he says Ashabu Shafi'i, this is a technical term in fiqh. This is not talking about Shafi'i, having these friends and they're hanging out and, and they're basically becoming his besties. Okay, this is not talking about besties in that sense, but Ashabu Shafi'i, meaning those that had belonged, or those that were part of the Shafi'i school. So they basically said something similar to the previous opinion that we had mentioned before, in where they considered it that it was really out of piety and recommendation not to eat from that animal that was basically hunted. And the animal, okay, you sent your training dog your trained dog to hunt, but then your trained dog had also shared, I guess, took his share. He's like, okay, well, I'll take some of my share too, and started eating it. Does that mean that that becomes something that is not lawful to you or not? So let's see. Shafi'i, the Shafi'iyya, at least students here, let's call them students. He basically said something similar to the first opinion, in where if that dog had eaten as a result of extreme hunger, then in that situation, we can eat from it. But if it did not eat from extreme hunger, in other words, it was, I guess, not sure how, through training, they probably would know whether it was really super hungry or not. They just considered that that's basically not the best, not reflecting the best training. In other words, it's still trained, but still needing more training, how not to eat before its master would eat. Okay. And of course, some scholars had basically considered that there's a difference between a trained dog and between a trained wild animal like a cheetah. And therefore, they had these differences. So some of them had actually considered, no, in general, if we're talking about a dog or we're talking about a cheetah, if they start eating from that hunted animal, then in that situation, it wouldn't be permissible. But then if they considered, if it's a bird, a wild bird that had started eating, they considered it was permissible. All right. And the reason for such difference, they said, well, for a dog or a wild cheetah, for example, that we are capable of forbidding them, we are capable of stopping them, but not really capable of stopping the birds. So they don't really, I guess, have the intellect to get the same training that wild dogs or at least dogs or trained dogs, let's say it that way, and wild cheetahs do. And that's why they said, "An yushla fayanshali." What is yushla fayanshali? I know it sounds like a weird word, but yushla fayanshali, meaning that you would offer them a reward and they would recognize that they have to follow a direction, and that's their way. They would follow the direction, and therefore they would recognize that they would get a reward for it. Majority of the scholars, before we take point 10 or category 10, the sisters actually had questions. So if you want to unmute yourselves, I'd be happy to listen. I know Sister Munira, you were saying that you had a question. Is she here? Oh, she
Yes,
left?
I'm here.
Oh, there she is. Go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah, so I don't know. My question is a little bit loaded, kind of.
That's all right. Give me
Yeah,
some more time to drink water.
okay, inshallah. So, Dr. Aisha, as you know, like here in the US, like right now, like it's kind of like the political time, like the primaries, And then for a long time, personally, I just try to keep myself, I guess, away from all that space just because I don't agree with most of the things. And also just keeping myself away from the, like the protesting and stuff like that. But then after what happened in Gaza, I was like, okay, I need to try and be more active and just trying to kind of like do more like advocating, but I'm considering myself as trying to do it like a faith-based activism, kind of. That's how I want to term it. So I guess my question is also, I don't know. What do you think about what's the best way for us Muslims that are still living in America, knowing everything that's going on? And I'm just gonna straight up give you an example. For example, I live in Detroit. In the primaries that's going on right now, for example, the guy that we do have, I can say the guy that's representing us in Congress in our district, I have called this person, I have messaged this person. I have tagged him on social media. I have gone to his town hall to protest and all that stuff. But he has refused to just even acknowledge what's going on in Palestine, He's refused to call for a ceasefire. Every time any type of voting comes up in Congress, he always votes anything that's against Palestine, you know? And that has totally like pissed me off. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not bothering with his office anymore. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to spend my time and energy to make sure that he loses in these primaries. Okay. Now we do have somebody else that is not, you know, she's not backed by the establishment, but of course, at the same time, she does have values that do not align with me as a Muslim, you know. So I do try and support the things that align with the Islamic community, or even just like the foreign policies that advocate for Palestine. But to be honest, like when it comes to issues like her going to Pride Parade and stuff like that, I keep away from it. I don't like her posts about it. I don't repost or share any information like that. So at the same time, I see where all this is going, and I'm just like, okay, I don't want to get too much into this, and then like kind of like I lose myself or I lose my faith, you know? So I don't know. Maybe if you can just give me your perspective
Well, a
about the
number
whole
of different things,
situation.
although it's completely off topic, but
Okay.
I would like to say that to simplify the politics in America as really is it pro-Palestine or against Palestine is wrong. Because if you're going to just consider whether a candidate is good for us or not, just based on Palestine, that's that's definitely going to be too myopic in seeing what are the circumstances that are basically going to be within Muslim interests. So what we need to look at is really a number of different issues and take these different issues and then see at least, I would say, what is bringing the Muslims the most interest. We may debate on whether this is a priority or whether that's a priority. We definitely understand and we definitely know that whether we're talking about Republicans or whether we're talking about the Democrats, that they're both not necessarily good for Muslims, that they're both going to be considering some form of, let's say, political interest and not necessarily the human interest and certainly not the Muslim interest, because that's not necessarily what they're going for. They're going for money. They're going for their own interest. And that it happens to be that they go for their own interest, but in order to get people's votes, and in order to convince the masses that you're going for their interests, you would basically sell them all these different rhetorical speeches to tell them about what matters to them, and that you're just going to be voicing their concerns and all of that, when in reality it's really whoever pays more is basically who he's going to be a mouthpiece for. So it's not necessarily an argument that they sometimes or they somehow had probably gotten wrong. Very few of these politicians have integrity. Okay. And most of them know no integrity, know no definition of justice. They're just mouthpieces to whoever pays for them. So if you're having AIPAC pay for them, they're just going to basically be the voices for AIPAC. If you see
And
the
they're
Zion,
basically funding both parties, right?
well, exactly, they're funding both parties right now, and both parties they're basically, it's like, okay, to them, as long as, hey, it supports Israel. So I would like to say it's important not to consider that our matters are only in Palestine, because it's not necessarily just in Palestine. Palestine definitely is one side. But if we are voting, for example, for the LGBT, because right now they're basically the biggest supporters for Palestine, that's actually a very big problem, because they definitely contradict our with the ethics that we carry, with the principles that we believe in. So just because one side we agree with, it doesn't necessarily mean that Palestine is going to be a aqidah. Okay, Palestine is part of the aqidah and not the complete side of aqidah. So just wanted to note that. And therefore, activism is not just activism for Palestine, but it's also activism for the Muslim rights in America, the rights of probably the Uyghurs in China, and probably the Muslims in I don't know, in Sri Lanka, or the Muslims in India, wherever it is. So that's the same thing. In where when we're speaking about Muslim rights and Muslim concerns and Muslim interests, it's important to understand that it's not just political interest and let me say the human rights, or the social rights here, and social justice, but we're also talking about what it carries in terms of ideology. So it's not easy to say, yes, vote for X or vote for Y, because the political situation is a lot more complex than X and Y. The political rhetoric right now exceeds one political matter, because they basically are running for office. So they're running to speak about one, the chief of staff and the chief of the White House, basically the president of the legislation, and president of the executive branch, and the president for judicial, all of that. So you're actually talking about someone that really controls all ends. So it's not an easy thing, but I would say it's important. Even if you don't necessarily get somebody, of course, the only person that you're probably going to get in where you would agree with them in completely, like a mitten and a hand you're wearing, is basically going to be a Khalifa. I mean, and you know what? Even a Khalifa you wouldn't necessarily agree with. All right. That's why we had all these different oppositions even during Khilafah. So it's not necessarily going to be finding a Khalifa. It's basically trying to be active, most importantly, with our awareness, and bring awareness and participating in that, and certainly trying to find the candidate that allows to create more awareness. I would say it that way. And why am I focusing on that area? Because education is actually speaking about the center that is indoctrinating the masses. So this one, I think many times we're really focused on emotional, the emotional side of different, I guess, speeches, and not necessarily the application and what is happening on ground. And I think many times with political activism, we're trying to rush this year or these years, and we don't look ahead in a couple years. Where is this taking us? And that's what really matters. The younger generation, they want, yes, I want something now, and I want it to be done now, and not really see, okay, if we're speaking about such a candidate or such a group or supporting, for example, I'll give you just an example in where if we are supporting the DNC and the Democrats, and what we're seeing down the road, in where just exactly what changes we had, in where they came in and basically started influencing the education system, and then they got the okay from the Supreme Court. Education system changed America like never before. The education system brought us a generation that even Americans themselves had never seen such a deviation ever before, in where right now, not only in education, but even in employment, you dare say anything against all of this indoctrination that's happening in schools, you would basically find yourself unemployed. You would find yourself not being able to afford to even pay your rent, mortgage, whatever it is, not being able to buy food. And definitely you will be also subject to even losing unemployment. So not only are you unemployed, but no, you could end up even losing the right to get unemployment and find yourself really homeless. So it's really looking ahead. Where are we really going? And I think we can't really rush and just think of just Palestine and just think of that. I mean, definitely, I am Palestinian. I definitely am very appalled and definitely saddened and extremely saddened. Sometimes I don't even sleep at night. Yes, I don't talk about it necessarily often, but that's because if we're just going to talk about this all the time, then we're not going to be getting to bring about the awareness. I'm not saying whatsoever not to talk about it. Definitely do whatever you can in order to protect the Muslim lives in Gaza, or whether it's in India, or whether it's in China, or whether it's in Libya, Syria, wherever it is. Definitely, this is supposed to be, part of the whole list of what is considered as a priority for Muslims. But at the same time, it's important to keep in mind that we should not get carried away with our emotions and panic because of what's happening, and not plan ahead in changing what I would consider as in the underground, the infrastructure that is to what is making the situation that we're in this bad. Okay, so this is extremely important to keep in mind. I think if we would make our political decisions based on our emotions, this is very problematic. It becomes a very impulsive decision making, but we have to plan ahead. And I think what is more important right now than Palestine, to be honest, is really the Muslims themselves in America, our children. I'd rather have my whole family die and become a shaheed in Gaza than actually lose their faith in America. Simple and period as that. If we're having our children in America right now losing their faith in America, what good is it? What is more dangerous than what's happening in Palestine is actually what's happening to our children in America. It's our children, it's our Muslim community losing their deen. That's even more dangerous. Because deen is supposed to be the number one thing within the list of the legal maxims. The preservation of nafs comes second. So we have to take that in consideration. Before we speak about the foreign policy, we have to speak about the policies that are right now dictating how our children are being educated, what's happening in schools, what's happening to our children. We're seeing in each and every single home, I can name, and I'm actually speaking about Muslim families now. This is serious. Why would you think I would leave the country that I was born in? And I'm talking about the US. And I've lived in the US. 14 years of my life I was in Palestine, but 30 years of my life I was in the US. Why would I leave? Basically, everything was going fine with me. It was really because I was capable of seeing, I would say, behind these windows, and they were contacting me. Every single home is right now facing a case where their daughter, specifically daughters, had either become lesbian or become bisexual or become an atheist, and specifically daughters. And this is becoming so prevalent that no one wants to really talk about it because they don't want to expose their privacies. And when no one is talking about it, everybody's talking about it like it's a different story, that it's not related to them. But the truth of the matter, it is in each and every single home. In every single home. And they don't want to see it. And this is actually more concerning to me than what's happening in Palestine. What's happening in Palestine? Salamat salmak. I'm not trying to basically, lessen from the atrocities that are happening there, but they're going to Jannah. But they're going to Jannah. But to have your son or daughter lose their deen, and you would think that, oh, well, they got their degree. They got a degree in what? A degree in hellfire? A degree in what? Lost their deen. And here it is, the parents are celebrating. Your son lost their deen. Your son became an atheist. Congratulations. Are you serious? And this is what's happening. So to me, that's a bigger concern than Palestine. Palestine, don't worry. The people there, let's just say, use that word, they know how to take care of them. Don't worry. They'll know how to take care of them really well. But in America, worry about your matters there because we're losing our children there. That to me is more concerning. And I think many times we're just talking about the candidates and how they feel about Palestine and not really taking their visions in regarding a lot of the morals and a lot of the education system seriously. Wallahu al-musta'an. So the sisters here is saying the candidate I'm speaking of is not funded by APAC or any lobby. The incumbent is APAC funded. Actually, we have no funds. The effort are grassroots, but I can say she is willing to engage the Muslim community in matters that mean to us, minus the LGBT. So here's one thing. All right. When you meet with the candidates, when they meet with you, they'll always use this broad language in where, yes, we understand, we're going to be with you, we're going to be voicing you, and they'll give you, they are con artists. They know exactly how to make you feel that they're really supporting you, and you would really think that they're supporting you. They are con artists. They are a bunch of liars, and they know how to play on your emotions. All right. So just be careful. Don't necessarily just take.
Are you there? Oh, we can't hear you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I'm back.
Oh,
So just one, yeah, sorry about that. So I wanted to just point that piece of it in where we really have to be aware of how politicians would play the game. Because if we're just taking their wording and not really being smart, there is, what is the saying? Al-mu'min kayyisun fatan. A believer is kayyis, is smart, and is capable of seeing beyond the words. So it's really important to be aware of how you want to take their words seriously. I'm not expecting them to be a Khalifa by all means, but I'm expecting you as a Muslim to be kayyisun fatan, to be smart, to look ahead, and to plan ahead in bringing awareness and plan ahead to making at least the place that you're in have the infrastructure for better da'wah, for better awareness, and certainly for a place that is, if you're staying there, you don't have the power or the means to leave, at least, hey, at least make sure that you're doing your effort to make it a place where your children are going to maintain their deen, and at least the politics there is not ostracizing your deen as well. So I guess that's the first and most important politics that we need to actually see right now. All right, so I hope I answered that one, Munira.
Yeah, you did answer my question, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Another question is there?
Oh, so is that okay if I ask?
Yep, sure. Go ahead, Noura.
Okay, sorry. It was actually about the what we talked about yesterday. So I was just wondering about the dog slobber on the animal. That was my first question. Yeah. Should you answer that real fast, or I don't think that's going to
So
take a time.
we are talking about some details, so we're gonna get there, Noura. We're gonna take
Okay.
it yeah, we're gonna get there, Noura, inshallah.
Okay.
So we'll
All
see.
right, so we'll postpone that one. But the other one I had was if so I didn't, I mean, if you could give like a couple examples of a hadith that were abrogated other than like the visiting the graves one, or
Okay, only a hadith.
yes, because I know about the Quran, like, but I didn't realize that some of the the hadith were abrogated, you know.
Oh no, a hadith can also get abrogated. So right there, let's actually see some of those hadith. Here we go. Since you wanted different hadith that were abrogated, let's look at different cases, right? So number one, we talked about al-qubur, visiting the graves. So that's one thing, and where the Prophet ﷺ, the second one is that the Prophet ﷺ actually had said that everything that the water or everything that fire touches, in other words, if it gets cooked, then therefore you would basically have to have wudu. So that was abrogated, and you don't necessarily have to make wudu from everything that was cooked. The third one is basically cupping. And whether the person that does the cupping, whether it's done to him or basically doing it to someone else, on whether the person does lose their siyam or not. So that's something that was abrogated as well. The third part in where in Mecca, of course, in Mecca, when we're speaking about in Mecca, whether it was permissible to kill or not, of course, during the Hurum times. So that was one thing that was abrogated. And of course, the part about in Nakhl, the part about palm trees. So the palm trees, the Prophet ﷺ had forbid them from hitting onto the palm trees, and then the Prophet ﷺ had basically told them that you basically أنتم أعلم بأمور دنياكم, that you know more about your dunya matters. And you could see this hadith is actually in Sahih Muslim. So they were basically hitting on the palm trees in order to have the palm trees pollinate. And then the following year, the trees didn't actually pollinate, certainly, because in order to have the palm trees pollinate, they needed to strike on the palm trees, like on the bark, in order to have the pollen basically go from one tree to another. But then it didn't. That's when the Prophet ﷺ had basically abrogated, or at least told them that this is something that is within their dunya. So they basically were given the permission to strike on the palm trees. Another thing is burying during the night. Burial during the night was actually not permitted until later on. Of course, it was considered as basically permissible to bury during the night. So yeah. And here it is, the Prophet ﷺ basically said,
Jazakallah
صاحبكم. So this is, I guess, to answer the question. Got this really right now. I mean, it's not that I prepared it before. All right. So, abrogation can happen also to a hadith and not necessarily to ayat alone. All right. To continue, of course, this is point number 10, in where majority of the scholars, when we're speaking about animals and we're hunting with animals, of course, certainly it can happen that they might maybe suck onto the blood, or perhaps, of course, they're animals. So whether it's sucking blood or whether it's eating the flesh, and certainly they went into, I guess, a debate whether that makes that hunt necessarily permissible to eat as human beings or not. So you could see Ata ibn Abi Rabah, he basically said, well, if they had I guess, drunk from the blood, that doesn't necessarily mean that they had eaten from it. So eating is different than drinking, or at least licking on the blood. And you could see other scholars, they disagreed and they considered it as hated, but not necessarily as impermissible. So you could see this debate. Just wanted to mention that one because I'm not going to go in each and every single detail. And of course, there's no differences of opinions between them that it is permissible to basically, if we're speaking about a wild bird causing an incision inside, of course, the body of whatever is being hunted, that if the other animal basically died as a result of that incision, then it would simply be permissible to consume. Okay. And okay, number 11, if we would see, and I want you to look at this one. This one's really rather interesting. So if I had, let's say, of course, with dogs, sometimes they would urinate on one side in order to send basically their information to another dog, and so forth. And what if we had our hunting dog basically meet with another dog, and then you're not really sure whether it was your hunting dog or whether it was some slay dog that was out there, and then they both came together, and it's like, oh, now you found a friend, but I'm not really sure, who is behind this catch, whether it's you, Catchy, or whether it's you, I guess, I don't know, Fluffy, who really caught this dog, or who really caught this deer. Was it Fluffy or was it Catchy? I wasn't sure. So in that situation, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, if the dogs would basically join together and you're not really sure which one caught that deer or whatever you're basically trying to catch, then in that situation, to be on the safe side, don't eat from it. Okay. And of course, when we're looking at this, we're really trying to look at making sure that we're not going into this gray area. And basically, if there is a possibility that it's the other dog that might have caught this animal, and therefore not your hunting dog, just because this is a serious matter, most scholars would actually say, well, avoid that because there's a possibility that it might not be your dog. Okay, so just wanting to look at that, and of course the evidence to it, in where we're talking about the Prophet actually saying, وَإِنْ خَالَطَهَا كِلَابٌ مِنْ غَيْرِهَا فَلَا تَأْكُلْ. If there are other dogs that were basically with your hunting dog, then don't eat, because you don't really know who really caught it. So it's basically within the area of a shubha. What is a shubha? A shubha is really that gray area where there's a possibility that it's not necessarily the halal thing that might have happened. So you want to make sure that you're on the safe side. So that's basically what it is. All right. And of course, وكذلك لا يؤكل ما رمي بسهم فتردى من جبل. And similarly, if, for example, exactly the same way, in where if you were to hit, let's say a deer, all right, you hit it with your own bow and arrow, but then when you hit it with your bow and arrow, this deer basically, okay, it touched it, but then this deer started rolling down off the mountain, or probably ending up even falling in the river. Then in that situation, you want to make sure that you don't eat from it. And let's say the reason to it is because it could have possibly died as a result of falling from high up, or a result of probably drowning. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ tells Adi, وَإِن رَمَيْتَ بِسَهْمِكَ فَاذْكُرْ اسم الله فإن غاب عنك يوما فلم تجد فيه إلا أثر سهمك فكل وإن وجدته غريقا في الماء فلا تأكل فإنك لا تدري الماء قتله أو سهمك. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, if you were to hit it with your bow and arrow, then say Bismillah. If a day passes by and you didn't say, except basically the effect, or at least the remains of probably your bow and arrow, then eat. But of course, you saw that, hey, there's my arrow, or there's my bullet in it that basically has my number, the number of my my bullets, etc. Then therefore this is mine, etc. Then you, and it's only lying there, that means it died as a result of what you had. But if you see that, yes, I found my bullet in it, here's my number, but it's basically lying down right there in the water, or probably from high up, possibly it had fallen from high up, then in that situation, since it was some while and you didn't see it, and you're not really sure whether it was a result of drowning or whether it was a result of you hitting it. So in that situation, it becomes an area of shubha, an area where, of course, it's basically keeping away, and basically an area where it could possibly not be halal. So therefore, you would take in consideration the halal and certainly your piety, and leave that and not eat it. All right, let's see. What if you had hunting dogs, and then they basically, this thing, the hunting dogs, they caught it and then it died before, of course, you would even catch it. Okay, what happens then? All right, and what if they were sleigh dogs? They caught this deer, and then you basically came in, you hit a rock at them, and they went away. Okay, but the deer is not entirely dead. So you're like, oh, well, I tried to save it, it didn't, and here it is. You tried to grab your knife, you grabbed your knife, and you basically right there just slaughtered it before it even died. Is that permissible? It's permissible, because it died as a result of you slaughtering it, and not as a result of these dogs basically I guess jumping at it. Okay, so in that situation, just to keep that one. If, like I said right there, if the person didn't necessarily have the time, okay, didn't have the time, he tried to get the knife out, and then I guess couldn't find it, and then didn't know what to do. It's like, okay, I'm trying to find it, and then boom, there it is, boom, it just died. Okay, then in that situation, you're too late. You don't want to eat it. And of course, I'm just making the story short, and even though differences of opinions, but just making the story short. And let's see, another piece, how do I know whether it is permissible or not? The easiest way is that ma lam yuntin. What is yuntin? Yuntin is basically to have a foul smell, and the foul smell would be a result of the basically going into decomposing and starting to decompose. So if it's starting to decompose, then you definitely want to avoid that, because that's a sign that this is dead and it's been a while, and therefore it's not healthy for you to eat. The bacteria is already starting to build in there. So definitely, even if it had your arrow, you definitely want to avoid it, because you want to make sure that you are healthy too. So here's the thing. When you look at this hadith in where فَإِنْ غَابَ عَنْكَ يَوْمًا فَلَمْ تَجِدْ فِيهِ إِلَّا أَثَرَ سَهْمِكَ فَكُلْ, if it basically was away for a day, and then you didn't find on that, I guess here's this dead animal that you hunted, you're not sure where it went. It might have run away and then, finally died after walking for some while, but no sign of it falling from above, and no sign of probably of drowning. Then in that situation, you're only seeing one thing. Might have most likely it basically was killed as a result of what you had hit it with, which is your arrow. And in that situation, should you eat it? Well, according to this hadith, yes, eat it. But here's one thing, is that there is a hadith exactly like that hadith that we did before, in where you could see that sometimes there are these contradictory records, and sometimes it's hard to really understand, well, how do I understand these contradictory statements? So let's see. Here's this hadith that says, كل ما أصميت ودع ماء ميت. Eat what you had basically killed as a result of basically you hitting it, and leave what you basically did not necessarily target. All right. But this hadith, and this is extremely important, when I would have two contradictory statements, the first thing that I need to look at before I would say one is to be canceled out or anything, I would first have to see, is one of them hadith authentic or both authentic? If both are authentic, is there a possibility that one of them abrogated the other, meaning canceled out the other? Or are we basically speaking about two different situations, circumstances, in where al-jam'u baynahuma, we're taking both texts and we're here speaking about probably and perhaps speaking about different circumstances? So in regards to this hadith, in where it's saying, well, if you hit it, then eat it. If you don't hit it, then basically you're going to avoid that. But here's one thing, of course, it contradicts this one, in where, well, if you only found that it was basically your target, how do we understand? And of course, there's another hadith where it says, فَكُلْهُ بَعْدَ ثَلَاثٍ مَا لَمْ يُنْتِنْ. And you know what? Even if you were to find it after 3 days, that you can actually eat it, but on a condition you're not finding a foul smell, meaning any sign that it's starting to decompose. So here's one other thing. So let's look at this hadith right there before we would want to say, well, here's the evidence that here's the evidence that basically contradicts what we first have to see. Is this hadith sahih or not? So the beautiful thing about these numbers right here is, again, they would give you the referencing for this hadith. Let's see. So the first narration, they basically said with Tabarani fil Kabir, and by the way, Tabarani, a lot of the hadith in Tabarani were lost, and believe it or not, were discovered recently, ironically. So Tabarani had 3 major books of hadith, and it was lost for a long while, but then it was actually discovered in a museum or a library in Turkey. All right, let's see. And in that chain of narration, there is Uthman ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Qurashi al-Waqqasi. So we've got us the hadith in where there's a person in the chain of narration in where al-Bukhari used the term tarakuh, they left him. And that was basically, let's say, a mannered way in order to say that this person is not necessarily a considerable resource that we would want to necessarily take as a reference. They would use taraku. They would basically say, well, they left him, or oh boy, what did I just do? Oh no. Okay, here we go. They would basically say for words like taraku. Let's see, Ibn Ma'in, he said, laysa bishay, he's not much. In other words, that's another way of saying that that's not necessarily a person that we would consider as a reference, and therefore would not necessarily consider him as a considerable or as an authentic or as a legitimate transmitter of hadith. Let's see another one. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar fi Talkhis al-Habir, where although Talkhis al-Habir, just a note, Talkhis al-Habir is just in 5 volumes, so not much, but in where he basically, of course, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is Shafi'i madhab. And Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, what he tried to do is go for the ahadith for al-Rafi'i al-Kabir, and in his book, in where it was really designated just researching the rulings that relate to the Shafi'i madhab, but he took basically those evidences, whether in the Shafi'i madhab or the other madhab, and wanted to look into those evidences. And even if the ahadith were not necessarily part of what the Shafi'iyya had regarded as their evidence to support their rulings, he would still look into those ahadith. And he basically said in regards to that there is Muhammad ibn Sulaiman as one of the chain of narrators, in where he said ضعفوه, considered him as a weak narrator. Let's see Ibn Hazm fil Muhalla. Remember, it's almost 8 volumes. 8 volumes, but Ibn Hazm, mashallah, I mean, extremely knowledgeable, even in hadith. And he actually said, Muhammad ibn Sulaiman, he's basically munkar al-hadith. Munkar al-hadith is basically a terminology to basically refer to a person that would object, and certainly in his words, what is even more authentic. Anyhow, so what you're seeing right here, in where this hadith is not necessarily authentic, even though you could see that it's in some of the major books of hadith. And this is a very important thing to say. Just because a narration or a hadith is in a major book of hadith, it does not make it authentic. Okay, this is extremely important. So, for example, Musannaf ibn Abd al-Razzaq is almost 20 volumes, maybe 17, 20 volumes, and so is Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba. It's huge. But just because you find it in there, it doesn't necessarily make it an authentic hadith. Same thing when we're talking about al-Bayhaqi. Al-Bayhaqi is about 12 volumes. All right, just because you find it in al-Bayhaqi, it doesn't necessarily make it an authentic hadith. So just by seeing, أخرجه الطبراني or al-Bayhaqi or al-Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, it doesn't make it authentic just because it says that there is a hadith numbering for it. All right. So here, when you look at wada' ma and mate, and leave what you had basically left, and you later, it was really just discovered later on, and you had seen only that, I have my arrow in it, that means I basically was the one that killed it. All right, so that's where you want to make sure that here it is, it's not starting to decompose, and you want to make sure that the circumstances that surround your target is not showing any signs of it dying as a result of another cause. Okay, and of course, the scholars actually had differences of opinions on that hunt that basically was missing, gone missing in three different opinions. The first one, they basically said that it is permissible to eat, whether it was a result of basically the arrow or whether it was a result of the hunting dog. And the second opinion, they said, well, nothing is to be eaten if it is gone missing, because they depended it based on this hadith in where eat what you had directly caught, and avoid and leave what you had lost or what it was gone missing. But of course, we commented on this in where this is actually not an authentic hadith. All right, let's see. The third opinion, they said, well, there's a difference between what was caught with your own target. If it was caught with your own target, hey, you know very well that you're capable of differentiating. This is my own target. I've seen the circumstances. There's no water around. There's it didn't fall from high, and of course they differentiated with between that and even dog catching something, because they considered that, well, there's only one answer. In other words, there's no doubt, and removing the doubt if I'm basically seeing my bullet, or if I'm seeing basically this target, and I know my arrows very well, so therefore that's actually, there's no other explanation, but it's actually coming from me. So in that situation, it's basically here considering that it's permissible if there is only one option to basically how this animal basically got deceased. And of course, they considered the difference between a hunting dog and basically an animal, an arrow, for example, or you basically hitting it with something. All right, because if it's a hunting dog or a hunting bird, that it can, the options can be very many, because it could run away, it could fall, possibly you got it confused with something else, etc. So that's why they basically had these different opinions in that regards. All right, let's see right here in where I'm going to jump, even though Malik said في غير الموطأ, and of course not everything that Malik said is necessarily in the famous book that he had narrated, al-Muwatta, in where he considered if this hunt basically stayed ثم أصابه ميتا لم ينفذ البازي أو الكلب أو السهم مقاتله لم يأكل. So if he's basically saying that if you basically encounter it dead and you're not seeing that it was a result of basically the arrow or even the dog, and you basically were not really sure in that situation, you would not eat from it. And of course, it's all about, are you capable of really knowing the circumstance or not? So you want to put your piety within all of this. You could see some of the details, they don't necessarily have one particular evidence on. It's all really trying to see, is this considered within the category of carry-on or dead meat, or is this a result of me basically terminating its life, and therefore me making this as basically similar to a Zabiha. That's the whole thing, and that's why they were debating all of this. And of course, you could see that whether it's al-Awza'i, Abu Abd al-Bar, or Abu Umar ibn Abd al-Bar, or whether it's Imam Malik, al-Shafi'i, all of them, they were just really trying to make one point out of all these ahadith, in where just make sure that the circumstance that surround the killing of this animal is not coming as a result of something else, and that it's basically really you. And even if you were to find it dead, and you would find basically your arrow or even your dog, then in that situation, even al-Awza'i had actually considered that it was permissible to eat. Al-Awza'i, I would say he's probably the forgotten scholar. Just an outside topic. Al-Awza'i was from Lebanon. Al-Awza'i was from Baalbek, Lebanon. And al-Awza'i was one of the major scholars. In fact, he had his own madhab, really. And al-Awza'i didn't necessarily have these students that did a good job in preserving his ilm. But, at age 25, he was already a major scholar at age 25. Just imagine that. Lived, of course, in Lebanon, later moved to Syria. Of course, Lebanon and Syria are one country. It's so sad how, colonialism divided us in the way that we're divided right now, where Palestinians and Jordanians would think they're two different people, and Syrians and Lebanese actually think they're two different people. And of course, you're seeing the same when we're talking about Tunisians and Algerians and all of that, and you're seeing the same when we're talking about Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq and all of that, when they were actually all one. It was really colonialism that divided them, and they're really adopting, and it really worked. Colonialism put that sahm, put that arrow in the heart of the ummah, and it's really working. So if you go to Jordan, you'll see that Jordanians hate Palestinians and Palestinians hate Jordanians. You go to Syria and you'll see that they hate Lebanese, and you go to Lebanon, you see that they
I
hate
never
Syrians.
saw that as a revert.
It's really sad. It's really sad how the ummah is divided. But back then,
Because when I went to the masjid here, I saw people from all different cultures coming together for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
that's the way it's
And
supposed.
that's how I saw Islam. And I was like, this is amazing, subhanallah. But
It's
alhamdulillah.
Yep, alhamdulillah. I mean, it's really sad how shaitan can get into us and can get in between us and actually create these divisions. But we're supposed to be one ummah, one body. And we're not just talking about the Middle East, but that's the same thing, whether we're talking about Bengali, whether we're speaking about
That's why we have to be the example for the people,
Absolutely. We have to be the example for the people. It's creating this bond. That's what creates one ummah, one body. But if we're looking at each other like, oh, you don't belong with me, I don't basically relate to you because you're a different background. We've got a problem right there, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically taught us that inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, the best of you are the ones that have the most taqwa. And that's not for you to judge whether I have taqwa or not. Allahu a'lam bi imanikum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who really the mu'min is. But it's really important to revive that in the ummah. Revive that in the ummah, in where, whenever you would meet a Muslim brother or sister, and at least a sister coming from a different country, get to know them. Learn more about them.
And that's a lot of brothers and sisters, not brothers, but a lot of like sisters, when they come back from Hajj, they kind of share that experience where they met people from all over and stuff,
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. We have to revive that. I mean, it's really sad that, when what we're seeing, discrimination goes farther than just an issue of, yes, creating these circles of your own selves, but it goes farther, because when we're speaking about discrimination, it actually affects your iman as well. It affects your iman, because if you feel superior to others, that actually means you're regarding them as inferior. If you're feeling superior, you're basically regarding yourself as the center, and you're thinking of others as less than you. Then you're not even recognizing other people as basically deserving the rights. You're not respecting other people. You're basically here disregarding their humanity. You're disregarding their rights. You're disregarding them in any way. And what you're gonna find yourself doing is really transgressing the limits of other people. Allahul musta'an, but that's a completely different topic. So anyhow, the sad thing when you read about al-Awza'i is that he died as a result of carbon monoxide. That's really sad. Was 70 years old. Yeah, he was,
SubhanAllah.
Yeah, so he was 70 years old. His wife basically put in, a whole, like not a barbecue, but it's kind of like in order to warm the place up. The place was closed up, was basically closed and basically burning coal. And of course, in this barbecue and put it inside, it was supposed to keep them warm. But of course, if there's no ventilation, that's carbon monoxide right there. So he recognized that he was losing his power. So he just puts himself in a state of sujood and just dies as a result of carbon monoxide suffocation. Very sad. But I mean, subhanAllah, it's really sad that sometimes we're not aware of carbon monoxide and the dangers of it. All right. It is 1:23. Before we would go for another point, I'll just say right here, the part about, I guess, before we go to 14, we'll end right there. The Prophet ﷺ basically in the hadith, ma lam yuntin, as long as it doesn't make a foul smell, and we're here speaking about what, not any type of a foul smell, we're talking about the smell of decomposition. Okay, so that was basically the reason, because if it starts to decompose, then in that situation, it would be within the category of things that are supposed to be not healthy, impure, and therefore it would not be permissible to consume. Okay, number 14. Tell me if you want me to go into that right now. We're basically talking about what if it was a Jewish hunting dog? Well, I mean, the dog is not Jewish, but I'm talking about, I've got let's just say I have a Jewish friend that basically has a hunting dog, or a Christian friend that has a hunting dog. Okay. And they trained them and they trained them well. Is that permissible to eat or not? Should I talk about that now, or stay tuned to learn more about my the catchy that a Jewish friend has?
I'm sorry, I'm cracking up here.
What do you think we should do? Should we stop right here or talk about this point? I think they're excited to know more about our Jewish friend and his catchy. All right, let's see. So our Jewish friend has a dog. Of course, we're here hypothetically speaking. Okay. Our Jewish friend basically has a dog, Catchy, and our Christian friend has a dog, Fluffy. All right. And they're both trained. And is that necessarily permissible? They're trained to catch dogs. And of course, we know that when we're speaking about the Zabiha, okay, we said that the slaughter, if it was slaughtered by a Christian or a Jew, and of course, if they slaughter it in that situation, it would be considered as permissible to eat their slaughter, right? We mentioned that one. But what if it wasn't a slaughter that they slaughtered? No, it was sending their Catchy and Fluffy. Let's see. So the first one, Al-Hasan al-Basri, and by the way, just Al-Hasan al-Basri, believe it or not, Al-Hasan al-Basri was having Salama as his nanny. Who's Salama? So Salama is basically the Prophet ﷺ's wife. She was an older wife, so she was basically his nanny. His mom, Al-Hasan al-Basri's mother, would go to work in the fields and would keep Al-Hasan al-Basri with Salama because she was older to basically take care of him. So Al-Hasan al-Basri was actually considered one of the most important figures to talk about and even live. I want to say talk about alone, but even live and embrace tazkiyah, spirituality, and all of that. All right. So Al-Hasan al-Basri had regarded it as makruh. So what is makruh? Makruh is not haram, but you want to keep in mind. So the word makruh actually means hated, all right? So in other words, not recommended. But you want to keep in mind that when we say something is makruh, some scholars may use the term makruh to actually mean something is haram. Okay, so why would they use that term, and why would they are they confusing these terms? So it's not that they're confusing these terms, is that they were extremely careful with using the word haram, because that's a big word. So they were extremely careful with using the word haram. So especially the Hanbali, they would use the word makruh to actually mean and refer to something as haram. So if you were to ask them, for example, is alcohol a haram? They'll say makruh. They don't mean that it's not recommended. They actually use the word makruh to also refer to something that is haram. So just keep in mind with that one. All right, so let's say here's the first opinion that basically said it was makruh. What if our Hindu friend basically had a hunting dog? Is that permissible? Let's see. The first opinion basically kariha sayd, that it's makruh. So let's see. Maybe we can write down the first opinion for our Hindu friend basically is makruh. The second opinion for our Hindu friend basically said it was permissible, and that is the opinion of Imam Malik, Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa. All right. They basically أجاز الصيد بكلابهم مالك الشافعي أبو حنيفة إذا كان الصائد مسلما. قالوا وذلك مثل شفرته. Okay, I confused that. No, I was wrong. So Malik al-Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, they basically regarded that if the person that basically sent off this animal was Muslim, they basically said it would be considered as permissible, because that is similar to if it were to be with their own knife. Okay, the majority of the scholars had regarded, let's see here, right here, majority of the scholars had regarded that if the person that is basically the master and that sent off this fluffy and catchy, if they were from Ahl al-Kitab, that is the master, then the majority of the scholars considered that it is jawaz saydihi ghayra malik. Majority of scholars considered that whatever it hunted, whether it's fluffy or whether it's catchy, basically Christian and Jewish masters, that it would be permissible, except Imam Malik, because Imam Malik said, well, there's a difference between having a Christian and a Jew / Ahl al-Kitab slaughter with their own knife, and between having the dog actually getting trained by a Christian or a Jewish master. And the evidence is that he said, لَيَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ اللَّهُ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الصَّيْدِ تَنَالُهُ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَرِمَاحُكُمْ. He basically here pointed out that there is a difference between, based on this ayah, O you who believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to test you with what you would hunt, and certainly with what your hands or even your bow and arrows would catch. So here Imam Malik said, well, see right there's a difference between a Muslim basically slaughtering, or a Christian and a Jew, and between even the slaughter and between, of course, sending a hunting dog. So he considered that you can't make qiyas here. Those are two different things. Okay, let's see. And he said, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say and did not include within this ayah right here a Christian and a Jew, therefore regarded that this is not referring to a Jew or a Christian, that they would be the ones to send their hunting dogs for hunting. So basically, that's where he regarded the differences. Let's see, Ibn Wahb And Ashab, they said, صيد اليهودي والنصراني حلال كذبيحته. Here's another opinion. They basically said, well, the hunting that a Jew or a Christian would basically send their dog off to is basically going to be halal, exactly like the dhabiha. So in other words, when you look at this, the ka right here, that would basically be considered as tashbih, or giving a similarity, and considered that is similar as how their own slaughter would be considered halal. Then therefore, even if they were to send Fluffy or Catchy, it would be considered the same thing. And of course, and he said, لا يجوز صيد الصابئ ولا ذبحه. As for, let's see who said that. And وفي كتاب Muhammad. Which Muhammad is that? Muhammad ibn al-Mawaz. Okay. So as for, of course, he said in that's a scholar, Muhammad ibn Waz, he said that it is not permissible to basically take the hunting of a Magian, or even, so this is basically, a Magian is basically, or a Zoroastrian is basically not considered from Ahl al-Kitab, so therefore not their slaughter and certainly not their hunting is permissible. And he said, وَهُمْ قَوْمٌ بَيْنَ الْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى وَلَا دِينَ لَهُمْ. Actually, they do have a religion, but this is what he regarded, that they're basically something that is in between Jews and Christians. So I would say that a lot of times they might not have a complete understanding of other faiths, so they're not necessarily in between the Jews and the Christians. Anyhow, if the person was Majusi, Majusi is not necessarily a Hindu, but I'm here using Hindu, but Majusi is supposed to be Zoroastrian. Okay, Zoroastrian, so basically something, it's different, it's a different religion than Hinduism, because Hinduism is completely different. They would have their scripture, and they would have their ideas, but Majus is basically the Persian religion at the time. Okay, فَمَنَعَ مِنْ أَكْلِهِ مَالِكٌ. So what if this Zoroastrian was to slaughter, all right, what would the slaughter take the rule? Oh, well, sorry, not slaughter, but slide here. We're talking about hunting. All right, let's see. Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa, and even their students, and majority of here, this is talking about people, but this is not people. This is talking about scholars. Okay, and let's see. They basically had considered it mana. They basically considered that it's not permissible to eat from what a Zoroastrian or a Hindu would basically send off their, I guess, their hunting dog to hunt, or hunting, let's say, hunting trained animal to hunt. Malik, Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, and Ashab. So why didn't he mention Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal? Well, he didn't mention Ahmad ibn Hanbal because the Hanbali madhab was not a madhab at the time. Okay, it wasn't a madhab at the time. It became a madhab later on. Let's see. And you've got one scholar, inshallah, one day we'll talk about Abu Thawr, in where he had two different opinions. The first one in where he agreed that it's permissible since it's trained dog, and also considered that il-Majus, or the Zoroastrians, are basically part of Ahl al-Kitab, ironically, and that whatever they would hunt is basically considered as permissible. I know, it's really rather strange.
Yeah, that's weird.
Exactly, and even though they're a completely different faith, but it was actually a debate between scholars on whether ألحقوهم بأهل الكتاب or not. Should we necessarily consider them a category of أهل الكتاب or not? There was this whole debate, really, إلا أن لا ننكح نساءهم, except we don't get married to their wives. Okay, so some scholars actually consider that they're basically going to be taking the same ruling. So you could see Abu Thawr regarded that. All right, what if a person is drunk? Okay, so this guy is drunk, and simply he sends off his, I guess, his dog. So he was drunk, but the dog wasn't. Okay. So here, of course, him being Maliki, he basically said if a drunk person, whether he had slaughtered or whether he had sent off his hunting trained dog, we would not necessarily eat from their dhabiha, because in order to make a dhabiha, you really need to have the intention and you really need to be focused. And certainly a person that is intoxicated does not have the intention, does not have the focus. Therefore, we're not really sure if they're aware of what they're doing. It could possibly be that they caught part of it and then didn't even complete it, and they were really imagining that they had completed the slaughter, when in reality they were just in a lala world where they didn't even know what they were doing. So that's basically yeah, I know that lots of scribbling today, but at least we got to at least point 15. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll actually continue to point 15. Let's erase all of our scribbly things right there, and here we go. And we are at point 15, inshallah. Let's see what we're going to discuss tomorrow, right? Let's see, part
I have a question. Are we still, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to
That's
interrupt.
all right. Go ahead, Noura.
Are we still on verse 4?
We're still on verse 4, dear.
Okay,
We're
mashallah.
right there. Yep, we're right here. Right here.
Okay, just making sure.
Right here. We're almost done. We still got a couple points to talk about here in terms of Ahl al-Kitab. And of course, we're going to talk about some things. All right. What about taking dogs as pets? Is that permissible? What about if they were dogs for to help us? Let's say I'm a shepherd and I had a dog. Like, there, is that permissible? And certainly, let's see, just remember page 311. Okay, let's see what other topics. And why are dogs haram to keep as pets? And certainly, if we're talking about dogs here, right, and trained dogs, and why are trained dogs even considered of any importance anyways? And look, inshallah, what about saying Bismillah before we send that dog off? How do we understand that tasmiyah? Do we say Bismillah before, or is it Bismillah when we're eating? And then, inshallah, we will be ending with that ayah 4. I know it's been a while, right?
Does this
But
cover also like training dogs for the blind or something? As far as keeping them?
Yep, we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Good question.
Inshallah, jazakallah khair.
Inshallah. Any questions before, inshallah, we would sign off? It's 1:40. I guess this is it. ربي يحفظكم جميعا. Today was a long day. We had Aqidah and it was very, what is buttery? All right. And right now, alhamdulillah, we kind of went off with the more in tafsir. And alhamdulillah, I mean, mashallah, I mean, you guys have been doing really good. We're on page 311 in tafsir Surah Al-Qurtub, in tafsir, Surah Al Maida, and tafsir al-Qurtubi, and this is the 7th volume. So you guys are doing really good and very well in being patient and taking the time to learn. ربي يحفظكم جميعا. And I hope, inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum.